No.
Sign.
Yes.
Can we just close this and get this
No.
computer?
Now I can.
You can hear us.
Recording.
Gary asked.
Or you want to test it again?
I think you need to shut that.
Jerry, ask the question, showing it's not, what's up, asking, they can hear us online. Once again, can you hear us online? They're saying yes.
Yes?
We're good.
Okay, so we're good. Yeah, they can hear you.
Okay.
We're ready again?
Yep.
All right, try again.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Just some quick introductions up here so you know who the folks are up here. Again, I'm Jerry Heiser, Sovereign Land Manager, and I just asked folks to stand briefly and state their name.
I'm Aaron Carranza. I'm the Director of the Regulatory Division. Within the division, we have the Sovereign Lands Management Program. Welcome.
I'm Jen Verliger. I'm an Assistant Attorney General for the Department of Water Resources.
I'm John Piskowski. I'm the State Engineer for the Department of Water Resources.
I'm Tia Jones. I'm the Sovereign Land Specialist.
I'm Andrea Travnik. I'm the Director of the Department of Water Resources.
Cheryl Fitzgerald, Administrative Staff Officer for DWR.
All right, thank you. First, I'd like to ask everyone to please turn off their cell phone ringers and sounds. And for those on Teams, please mute if not speaking as a courtesy to those providing comments. This public meeting has been called under North Dakota Administrative Code 89-10-01-7 for the purpose of allowing all interested individuals an opportunity to submit information and comments concerning the Sovereign Land Permit application number S-2095 submitted by BNS for the construction of a new rail bridge over the Missouri River in Burley and Morton counties. As a reminder, this public meeting is specific to application S-2095 only. Sovereign Land Permit application number S-2398 relevant to the proposed demolition of the existing BNSF rail bridge will be reviewed and considered separately according to standard department procedures. Information gathered at this meeting will be considered by the Department of Water Resources for the deliberation and final decision on the pending application. This meeting is not an adjudicated proceeding under North Dakota Century Code Chapter 28-32, which means the persons providing comment today will not be cross-examined and the department will not be responding to comments at this meeting. We also ask for no applause or disruptive behavior during this meeting. The comments received will be considered with all other written comments that are received. After consideration of all the comments, the Department of Water Resources will make a determination on the permit application, either to approve as proposed, approve with modifications based on comments received, or to deny the permit. This meeting is being recorded, and we ask that everyone that is intending to provide testimony use the microphone at the podium for transcription purposes. Please speak clearly when testifying. Please sign the registration sheet for commenters, which is placed at the microphone, and identify yourself for the record before you begin your comments. If you have a prepared statement, a written copy of your statement is appreciated and will be helpful. In order to save time, if someone has previously made the same comments you were planning to make, it is not necessary or advantageous to state them again into the record. If you have lengthy written comments or information to present, please summarize what is being submitted when you speak. Both your spoken comments and written information will be fully reviewed and considered and responded to in the department's written decision. If you'd like to receive a copy of the written decision, please print your contact information on the sign-up sheet located at the information table. At this point, the meeting is now open for comments, and anybody that would like to start is free to do so. Please be cognizant of the time and the number of those wishing to comment, and the fact that this meeting has been scheduled for no more than 2 hours. Please consider limiting your speaking time to no more than 5 to 10 minutes out of consideration for all those present. And with that, it's over. Thank you.
We can share.
You are all important.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nicholas Bradbury. I live here in Bismarck and work as a physician at St. Alexius Hospital, and I'm a board member of Friends of the Rail Bridge. I appreciate the opportunity to speak regarding this permit application today. Who is FORB? Friends of the Rail Bridge, FORB, was formed in 2017 with the mission to preserve the historic rail bridge at Bismarck-Mandan. We're a nonprofit group of local residents interested in preserving the historic rail bridge. No one on our board is paid, and there are no financial relationships to be disclosed within our efforts. As evidence of our group's support, I present to you this petition containing 5,929 signatures in support of our efforts to preserve the historic Bismarck-Mandan rail bridge. This represents only a fraction of our supporters. The bridge is the center figure of the dramatic stage of the Missouri River. Our recreational trails along either side of the river are the busiest in the state. The bridge figures as a constant presence in our community. We take our graduation photos with the bridge. High school sports teams pose with the bridge. We pose for engagement photos with the bridge. We gather for family reunions on the riverbank and take photos with the bridge. Murals of the bridge are found in our hospitals, postered along the walls of restaurants, sporting goods stores, even our new car wash. Countless local businesses and TV stations use the image of the bridge to represent our place on the Northern Plains. All of these factors must play into consideration of a sovereign lands permit from the standpoint of recreation, aesthetics, cultural and historical resources, and potential alternative uses of the historic rail bridge, all of which fall within the domain of sovereign lands permitting. The U.S. Coast Guard first announced a public hearing regarding the new bridge project held at the Ramkota Hotel over 5 years ago in December 2017. I stood with scores of others attesting to the current, modern, active role of the historic rail bridge in the everyday culture of residents' lives, and also the bridge's status as a historic treasure. As far as I can tell, since then and until today, this meeting today is the first dedicated public meeting in the entire process to be conducted by North Dakotans. Until now, the permitting process has been directed entirely by out-of-state representatives of out-of-state entities. Initially, U.S. Coast Guard and BNSF representatives held a couple meetings in Bismarck. However, for the past 4 years, all meetings have been removed, conducted virtually via Zoom meetings, with Washington, D.C. representatives and Minnesota and Kansas City representatives arbitrating what has been presented to us strictly as a matter involving a corporate project on corporate land involving corporate property. We North Dakotans have not been heard. Those of us speaking up for North Dakota's interests in this process have been told repeatedly to take a back seat. And who wouldn't? We've been told the very big names of the decision makers: U.S. Coast Guard, FEMA, Corps of Engineers, BNSF, Berkshire Hathaway, perhaps the richest company on earth. Local city and county leaders have felt overwhelmed, and the state attorney general twice declined to represent North Dakota's interests. Although I've always said that the Missouri River belongs to every American, I was shocked to learn just a few months ago that the original sovereign lands permit application for this project was filed in 2017. That means it was well known that this project was being carried out on North Dakota state property and involved North Dakota state assets. Well, North Dakota hasn't figured into it much up to this point. North Dakota's assets and sovereign interests should have been identified before any of the other components of the project were advanced by the U.S. Coast Guard. Outwardly, the project application may seem to carry 5 years of prior planning leading up to this point. However, the project as proposed, which would require tear down of the historic rail bridge, is not really different than what was proposed over 5 years ago. No meaningful improvements have been made through the public process up to this point. The permit request should be denied as presently constituted, with new bridge construction only permitted after consideration of the critical public trust obligations to protect recreation, aesthetics, cultural and historical resources, and potential alternative uses of the historic rail bridge. The new construction should not undermine the integrity of the historic rail bridge. Conditioning permit approval to use the alternative of a 92.5-foot rail offset as identified by the project applicant with the U.S. Coast Guard, with 400-foot bridge spans and new piers in line with those of the existing historic bridge, would allow the applicant to fairly move forward while also preserving North Dakota's sovereign land interests. Thank you for your time this morning.
Glasses out. My name is Eric Sackerson. I'm a community leader and retired third-generation owner of Saks News, a North Dakota wholesale distributor of books and magazines that my grandfather started in 1920. I'm here to speak about the adverse effect on a significant cultural resource whose destruction this sovereign lands permit would sanction. I am fascinated by the American story, and I'm in awe at how North Dakota and the rail bridge at Bismarck are woven into its fabric. It was 1864 when Congress chartered the Northern Pacific Railroad, signed into law by Abraham Lincoln, granting 47 million acres of public land, the people's land, to a private corporation to finance it. To put that in perspective, they were given 25,000 acres for every mile of track they laid. The enterprise was headed by America's foremost financier, Jay Cooke, whom Lincoln had tapped to fund the Union effort in the Civil War. By 1873, the tracks reached a shabby settlement that sprang up at the place where the railroad would cross the Missouri. To attract European investment, Cooke renamed the place Bismarck after the German chancellor. The scheme didn't work. The railroad was hopelessly overextended, and by the fall of that year, Cooke's financial empire collapsed, triggering the Panic of 1873. The worst global economic depression in history started right here in Bismarck. In 1876, the United States waged war against the Lakota and Cheyenne. The purpose was to seize tribal lands in violation of the Fort Laramie Treaty and transfer them to the railroad. It is no stretch to say that Custer died for this bridge. Eventually, construction of the line continued west, but the challenge of bridging the river remained, with its powerful ice jams and violent spring floods. It was met by an engineering genius, George Shattuck Morrison, who used pneumatic caissons, giant wooden boxes inside which laborers dug away the silt while stonemasons set granite blocks above, sinking the piers into the shale bedrock 40 feet below the riverbed. Bridge construction had just begun when a flamboyant tycoon, Henry Villard, acquired the Northern Pacific. The year the bridge was completed, a gang of political bosses in league with the railroad hijacked the territorial capital from Yankton and moved it to Bismarck. Opportunist and showman, Villard invited a who's who of American and European celebrities to cross the continent on his railroad. They would see the American West and celebrate driving the last spike at Gold Creek, Montana. In Bismarck, they would participate in the ceremony laying the cornerstone for a new territorial capital. The first week of September 1883 was one for the history books. On September 2nd, President Chester A. Arthur crossed the rail bridge on his return to the White House from a month-long adventure in Yellowstone Park. He would address the Villard Party at a gala in St. Paul. On September 4th, Sitting Bull crossed the bridge from Mandan to Bismarck to play a part in the cornerstone ceremony. It was the first time the great Hunkpapa chief ever rode aboard a train. On September 5th, Civil War hero and former President Ulysses S. Grant crossed the bridge with the Villard Party on their way to the last spike celebration. Grant was a featured speaker at the cornerstone ceremony in Bismarck. And on September 7th, Theodore Roosevelt crossed the bridge on his first trip to the Badlands to hunt a buffalo before they were gone. It's ironic that 20 years later, the very railroad that carried him west to the romance of his life should be the subject of the case that sealed his reputation as the trust-buster president. BNSF never seriously considered preserving the bridge. Instead, they treated it like one of 1,000 rusty relics kept on their books as obsolete inventory. The Bismarck Rail Bridge is just as important in the American story as the Brooklyn Bridge or the Golden Gate. No one would suggest these historic landmarks are past their useful life. Representing the Fort Abraham Lincoln Foundation, I attended the consulting parties meetings under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. BNSF's conduct during those meetings could be described only as an abuse of power. They've treated the permitting process as nothing more than a regulatory nuisance, and they're at it again with this sovereign lands permit. It makes you wonder if that was the legacy Abraham Lincoln envisioned when he put his faith in the fledgling railroad and signed the charter to create it.
Thank you for this opportunity to present comments on this project and sovereign lands permit application. My name is Lyle Witham, and I'm a mostly retired lawyer who is doing a few pro bono cases in retirement. Serving as the in-house counsel for Friends of the Rail Bridge is one of those cases. One of the first things that happened to me when I was assistant AG when I started in 1992 was Charles Carvel was working on a Mills case that I cite in the materials. And I worked for the AG's office for about 16 years. And one of the last things that Charles was working on, and I also helped edit, were those that 2005 AG's opinion, and also your document that deals with the public trust document that I cite quite a bit. And that really is it should be your controlling your controlling law. That's the AG's opinion, and that's the document that was adopted to apply the public trust doctrine to sovereign lands cases, permit proceedings like this one. FORB is a small nonprofit formed to preserve the historic 1883 railway bridge between Mandan and Bismarck. It was a team effort for the FORB board to prepare the extensive written comments that FORB filed electronically on Wednesday with the Department of Water Resources on this proposed project. Other FORB board members will provide oral comments on the parts of the submission that they were primarily responsible for preparing. My comments will be limited to a brief summary of the main points in the extensive legal and technical comments FORB submitted. First, neither this project nor BNSF's permit application can be bifurcated to separate construction on the proposed new bridge from destruction of the historic bridge. In BNSF's proposed project, the proposed new bridge is located too close to the historic bridge to allow preservation of the historic bridge. So granting the permit to construct as proposed results in the eventual destruction of the historic bridge. In other federal and state permit proceedings on this project, construction and destruction have been considered together. For the reasons stated in Forbes' written comments, that is true for this proceeding also. Second, the issue of ownership of the riverbed beneath the historic bridge must be addressed. When a historic landmark is located on state-owned land, the state has a non-discretionary duty to consider alternatives to destruction under NDCC section 550207. This issue must be addressed before a sovereign lands permit for destruction can be granted. Again, those issues are addressed in detail in Forbes' written comments. And as I just said, a permit to construct 20 feet from the existing bridge is also a permit to destruct in effect. Third, the authority of the Department of Water Resources to approve, grant, condition, modify, or deny BNSF sovereign lands permit application is extensive. This proceeding is not a second-class appendage to the federal permit process. Rather, issues of ownership and management of sovereign lands and historical structures located on sovereign lands are issues of state law over which state agencies and state courts have jurisdiction. BNSF is part of one of the richest and most powerful entities in the world. And this project involves one of the most important historic landmarks, arguably the most important historic landmark located on state-owned land in North Dakota. Four comments are prepared to summarize the complex legal and factual issues that must be considered and addressed under state law before a sovereign lands permit can be granted, conditioned, modified, or denied in this case. We hope those comments will be useful to you in addressing those issues. In summary, for the reasons stated in Forbes' written comments, the historic bridge is located on sovereign land, and the Department of Water Resources has authority to grant, condition, modify, or deny BNSF's sovereign land permit application. That's language right out of your controlling rule. Also, for the reasons in Forbes' comments, the state has a non-discretionary duty under NDCC section 550207 to cooperate with political subdivisions and the director of the State Historical Society in identifying and implementing any reasonable alternative to destruction of the historic bridge. The department should consider any reasonable alternative to destruction identified through that process, including any identified in this sovereign lands permit proceeding. Forbes supports EIS offset alternative to the 92.5 foot offset and the 400 foot span alternative that retains the existing structure as a reasonable alternative to destruction that satisfies the requirement that the historic bridge be preserved when there is, as in this case, a reasonable alternative to destruction. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm here today to talk about the environmental impact on the cultural and historic integrity of the Missouri River at the Bismarck-Mandan Rail Crossing. The North Dakota Sovereign Land Management Plan imposes the state the duty to manage sovereign land to foster not only the public's right of navigation, but also other important aspects of the state's public trust interests such as bathing, swimming, recreation, and fishing, as well as irrigation, industrial, and other water supplies. The doctrine further requires the protection and preservation of other interests, including natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values. Good morning. My name is Claudia Burr, and I'm the Director Emeritus of the State Historical Society of North Dakota, the former State Historic Preservation Officer, and a member of the FOR board. Sovereign Land Management Plan Recommendation 3 states that the Office of the State Engineer should consider the impacts of action on sovereign land to cultural and historic resources before granting or modifying permits. Although the State Historical Society is included in the list of agencies consulted for the sovereign land permit application, language was also added to this document, reinforcing the importance of cultural and historic resources. The segmenting of BSNF's sovereign lands permit from the entirety of the existing bridge and new bridge proposal is an attempt at circumventing the cultural and historic importance and responsibilities associated with this project. There is not a more significant cultural or historic place in North Dakota or the Northern Great Plains than the 60 miles between the Owyhee and Garrison dams. In fact, Congress designated it as a National Heritage Area in 2009. Civilizations that are centuries old inhabited this land. It is the homeland of the Nueta, the Mandan people. The only remaining villages of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara nations exist in this corridor. As Western expansion reached these homelands, monumental events would change the Northern Great Plains forever. The arrival of the railroad connecting Eastern interests with Western opportunities was a pivotal event in the history of the United States. Contemporary developments continue to contribute to the history of this place. Needless to say, this historic bridge stands as a tribute to time and technology and is a rock-solid monument to this state, region, and nation's history. It should be acknowledged as worthy of and priority for preservation before a sovereign lands permit is requested for a new bridge. The existing rail bridge was designated to have a historic significance in a 2017 letter from the State Historical Society in response to the original BNSF sovereign land permit application. The historical finding invoked Century Code 550207. Under state law, any historical or archaeological artifact or site that is found or located upon any state land owned by the state or its political subdivisions or otherwise comes into the custody or possession and which is, in the opinion of the director of the State Historical Society, significant in understanding and interpreting the history and prehistory of the state, may not be destroyed, defaced, altered, removed, or otherwise disposed of in any manner without the approval of the State Historical Board. BNSF should be proud of and supportive towards saving this landmark in railroad history. As part of North Dakota's sovereign land, we should all work together, protecting the integrity of these resources for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is John Risch. I'm a lifetime North Dakota resident, born and raised in Mandan, last 30 years in Bismarck. I also spent over 42 years in the railroad industry. I'm currently retired, but I was a railroad engineer for 30 years on the BN and BNSF out of Mandan. I was a trade union representative statewide and then nationally. The last 10 years I was in Washington, D.C. as the National Legislative Director of the Smart Transportation Union, the largest of the rail unions.
John, could you use the microphone?
You can't hear it? No. Okay. I'm also a member of Friends of the Rail Bridge. I fully support BNSF effort to build a new rail bridge. I think that's an important thing to do for a state of North Dakota, for freight transportation in America. And it's good that they're going to build a bridge that's capable of handling double track, because the future of the rail industry really is based on double track. You can travel so many more trains over it. I took leave on a leave of absence to go to Washington, D.C. in 2009. And back then we were running 25 trains a day through Bismarck. Today it's down to about 7. There's a host of reasons for that. But BNSF investing in a new bridge with double track will help perhaps get better traffic in the future. And if we're ever going to get passenger service back in Bismarck, the double track, I think, would be very vital. The bad news of BNSF proposal is that it's located right next to the existing bridge, and the proposed new tiers are not aligned with the old tiers. This is intentionally ill-conceived plan virtually necessitates the destruction of our historic railroad bridge because of the increased risk of ice jams and adverse scouring effects. But it doesn't have to be so. No one that I know of is opposed to building the new rail bridge. The only contention is the unnecessary destruction of the existing bridge. BNSF construct a new bridge and allow our community to preserve the existing bridge. Had BNSF simply worked with the community to preserve the existing bridge, the new bridge would already be under construction. BNSF's stubbornness and demands to tear down the existing bridge is why this whole project is being delayed. The easiest fix for this is if the CFO, Chief Executive Officer of BNSF, simply decreed that we're going to leave the existing bridge intact and build a new bridge 92 feet north. That would be the easiest fix. Katie Farmer, who's just recently been named Railroader of the Year by Railway Age magazine, she could just issue that decree and it would be so. Is Katie here, Amy? No, she didn't show up. She's the one that could significantly solve this problem that we're facing today. As a national, local, and state and national railroad representative, I've dealt with BNSF for decades, worked with them on all kinds of projects to promote the rail industry. They can be very stubborn, they can be arrogant, and that's the case here. I just would hope that they would change their ways, or you would deny actually this application and it require that the bridge be built 92 feet north. That would be the fix to the whole thing. We need to preserve this, and under the statute, the existing rail bridge for tourism, culture, and historic reasons, and the alternative use would be a walking trail between Bismarck and Mandan. Thanks for the opportunity to appear. I got your testimony there.
Hello, my name is Christy Fisher, and I'm a resident of Bismarck and a licensed civil engineer with over 30 years of experience. I was shocked to hear how far things had progressed on a project that would involve destruction of this historic and iconic bridge. When I'm out fishing on the Missouri, I look up at that bridge and I think about my great-grandfather traveling across it, getting off the ship from Norway in 1892 on his way to the silver mines in Idaho. That bridge is important to all of Bismarck and to hundreds of thousands of other Americans. Although I've never volunteered for anything like this, I'm typically not on this side of the microphone. I'm on that side. I felt that I wanted to join FORB earlier this year because I could not imagine there wouldn't be a reasonable path forward to constructing a new bridge while at the same time preserving the historic bridge. And of course there is. The proposed project you are considering for a sovereign lands permit has numerous potential negative effects on riparian owners' rights, recreation, navigation, erosion, fish and wildlife, and water quality. Incomplete work accepted by the U.S. Coast Guard in the course of the EIS process really puts North Dakota Department of Water Resources in a bad position, and one that you shouldn't have to be in. By the end of a well-run federal EIS process, many of the questions that remain on this project should have been answered, and they are not. Details and supporting technical documentation are provided in our written submittal, but here are some of the key issues. This application for construction of a new bridge independent of demolition of the historic bridge is not logical and appears to be BNSF trying to game the system. As the 2020 Ackerman-Esfold analysis indicates, yes, it is possible for both bridges to remain in place without generating a net rise in water surface elevations if floodplain drainage structures are incorporated into the west side of the I-94 fill. Given that mitigation is not included in this application, however, DWR obviously cannot approve the application as a standalone project. Instead, you would need to condition the permit to either install that mitigation in I-94 or demolish the historic bridge structure. In addition, although a new and old bridge can feasibly coexist without generating net rise, this particular design alternative you are reviewing would make retaining the existing bridge physically infeasible due to both its alignment and the locations of the proposed piers. In short, if DWR were to permit this project, you would be requiring destruction of the historic bridge in the process. Even if BNSF submits a new permit application, which includes destruction of the historic piers in conjunction with the new bridge, independent engineering review of the BNSF consultant's work by another consulting firm indicates that installing 5 in-channel piers in place of the 3 existing in-channel piers could generate a net rise in water surface elevations, impacting up to 500 upstream structures. Instead of addressing the technical issues that were raised by an independent review of the hydraulic model, the U.S. Coast Guard appears to have simply continued on with the EIS process and not addressed those issues. Placing the new bridge piers in an entirely different location than the existing piers in a highly mobile sand bed river channel with numerous other in-channel structures, including 2 other bridges and their piers, trading structures, and hard bank protection, very likely has consequential effects on patterns of scour and deposition. Results could be to increase scour along either bank, particularly the west bank, which with current rail bridge configuration experiences fairly minimal scour despite experiencing erosion due to other factors. The result of increased scour can very well be undercutting of the extensive riprap bank protection currently in place, requiring individual private property owners to reconstruct those failed sections and construct new section of hard bank protection in the future. All of those activities have a negative short and long-term impact to fish and wildlife habitat, water quality, and of course the private property owners themselves who will have to personally pay for that work to protect their bank. Another result of changing the patterns of scour and deposition in this reach generated by the new pier locations could increase aggradation across the channel. Rather than the somewhat deep channel currently used by larger watercraft, the change in pier configuration could well create shallow water conditions across the river. Dredging would have to take place in the future at taxpayer expense to maintain a channel over time, which would impact water quality and fish and wildlife habitat long into the future after these initial construction impacts. Ultimately, no one has any idea what the impact of this proposed project will be on the river and adjacent banks because the applicant has not completed modeling to evaluate the impact at a reach level of the proposed piers. There is not an engineering report that indicates that the proposed project will not cause bank erosion or aggradation to the channel. Sediment transport in this reach of the river is actually well studied, and USGS has developed a calibrated multidimensional sediment transport model for it, which could be utilized as a basis for comparative modeling of existing versus proposed conditions with a software package like Flow3D or other fluid dynamics software. That said, there is an alternative that you could easily permit today that avoids these concerns as well as future controversy. BNSF developed an alternative for a new bridge offset 92.5 feet upstream of the existing bridge with 400-foot spans whose piers would match the existing bridge. They would be in line with those piers parallel to river flow, essentially allowing them to act as one structure. You could confidently approve that permit without concern for what change the new piers would generate to the bed and banks of the river. With corrected hydraulic modeling and drainage structures in the I-94 fill, there would be no net rise concerns, no tie to the historic bridge, and the project could move swiftly to construction. I'll just end with expressing my confidence that the North Dakota Department of Water Resources has experienced and competent technical staff that will thoroughly review this application to ensure that natural resources, the public, and riverfront landowners are protected.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present comments on BNSF's sovereign lands permit for construction of a rail bridge at Bismarck, Mandan. My name is Mark Zimmerman, a lifelong resident of North Dakota and a longtime resident of Bismarck. I have been privileged to be a member of the Friends of the Rail Bridge and have been involved with the permitting process since its initiation in December of 2017. My concerns with this application, as submitted by BNSF, are focused on the recreational component of the list of considerations the state engineer is required to address in this permitting process. I believe I bring a unique perspective to this area of concern, as I have been involved with recreational efforts for a number of years as the former director of North Dakota Parks and Recreation Department and as a current member of the Bismarck Board of Park Commissioners. I want to clarify that my comments are my personal comments and do not represent the department or the park district. The recreational value of walking, cycling, rollerblading on the trails along the river, as well as the unique opportunities for swimming, boating, fishing, and access to the Missouri River so close to Bismarck and Mandan cannot be overstated. Literally thousands of citizens and visitors to our communities and state enjoy the trails each and every month of the year. Summer weekends find the Missouri River filled with fishing enthusiasts, recreational boaters, kayakers, canoers, swimmers, and people who simply enjoy sitting along one of the last free-flowing sections of the Missouri River. Trails are filled with individuals and families enjoying the emotional and health benefits of the great outdoors. Our beloved and iconic bridge is a central focal point of the recreational opportunities along both sides of the river. Canoes and kayakers gauge paddling distances by referencing the rail bridge. Walkers and cyclists reference the bridge as they utilize the paved trails on the east end and the wonderful natural trails on the west end. Unfortunately, the permit application does not adequately address the impact of the 3+ years of construction of a new bridge on the recreational opportunities now enjoyed by thousands of people. Those concerns need to be addressed in the review of the permit application. However, more important is a consideration that must be given to the value of retention and repurposing of the existing bridge for enhanced recreational opportunities. In the next couple months, the North Dakota State Legislature and the Office of the Governor will be working together on programs that are designed to attract families to North Dakota for the thousands of job openings and available. Data shows that a community's amenities and unique recreational opportunities are major determining factors in a family's decision to move to a new community and state. Our bridge is one of a kind treasure that will enhance and expand the recreational opportunities for all North Dakotans, new and old. I respectfully request the North Dakota Department of Water Resources and the North Dakota State Engineer deny the application and institute consideration of factors under the public trust doctrine that would protect this irreplaceable historic and iconic structure and hopefully lead to alternative uses and a new life for our beloved bridge into the next century. Thank you for allowing me and many others to voice our concerns.
Good morning. My name is Ann Richardson. I'm Secretary for Friends of the Rail Bridge. I come to you today with neither legal nor technical expertise, but with a love for this place and a concern for the impact the project as proposed may have on its future. The North Dakota Sovereign Lands Management Plan, published by the Office of the State Engineer in 2007, states that the public trust doctrine, as interpreted by the North Dakota Supreme Court, imposes on the state the duty to manage sovereign land to foster not only the public's right of navigation, but further requires the protection and preservation of other interests, including natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values. I'm struck by the beauty of our Missouri River every time I encounter it, which is several times a week if I'm lucky. No matter how many hundreds of times I cross, I always crane my neck to see exactly how it looks today. It's rarely exactly the same. The great American author John Steinbeck once wrote, quote, "Someone must have told me about the Missouri River at Bismarck, North Dakota, or I must have read about it. In either case, I hadn't paid attention. I came on it in amazement. Here is where the map should fold. Here is the boundary between east and west." For the last 140 years, George Morrison's rail bridge across the Missouri has spanned our picturesque landscape, the gateway to the American West. The current bridge was built with funds paid by the settlers of these lands by sale of plats granted to the railroad by the federal government to create the Northern Transcontinental Railway. We North Dakotans love our rail bridge. its sleek granite piers and graceful steel arches contrasting sharply but elegantly with the mighty Missouri, are seen printed in grand scale on the walls of restaurants and shopping malls, in dozens, if not hundreds, of local advertisements, and in senior pictures, family portraits, and wedding poses by the thousands. But it means more to us than just a pretty bridge. It's a symbol of our home. This architectural marvel is our marker of place, our Eiffel Tower, our Brooklyn Bridge. We may not have populations in the millions, but our connection to our local story and its place in the greater history of our nation is just as important. This railway remains a vital artery of commerce, and I hope it continues to thrive, as I believe that is what's best for our state and for our country. But the interest of this national railroad company should not be allowed to overshadow the interests of the people who live and work here, those of us who cherish this place and want to preserve it and shape it for future generations to enjoy. I will never understand why Burlington Northern Santa Fe has painted this project as a choice between the past and the future, that we must tear down the old to make way for the new. That simply isn't true. This sovereign lands permit application is for the construction of the new bridge. If you approve the preferred design of the railroad, the destruction of the current one will be the only safe option that will remain. We will lose the potential future connection of trails, of creating an exciting hub of recreation, community, and cultural heritage. Please consider carefully and approve a new bridge that will allow a win-win solution, one where the railroad's needs are met and we can safely retain the bridge to our past and the potential for our future. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. My name is Tracy Potter. I'm a former many things, including most recently the senator for the east half of the bridge, which arises in District 35. I was State Tourism Director, President of the Fort Abraham Lincoln Foundation and Missouri Riverboat, Inc., and founding president of the foundation named by Congress as the administrator of the Northern Plains National Heritage Area. I'm a historian and author of published and unpublished works about our region's history, and my written comments run to about 2,100 words because I give you a little history in there, but I'll try to summarize. I ask you to assert our state's rights to our own history and culture. North Dakota's earliest politics were dominated by the Northern Pacific Railroad and its chief lobbyist in Dakota, Alexander Mackenzie. Using the deep pockets of the NP, Boss Mackenzie cleverly engineered removal of the territorial capital from Yankton to Bismarck and the new bridge on the NP line in 1883. When we became North Dakota in 1889, the first draft of our Constitution was written by the choice of the president of the Northern Pacific and fleshed out under the influence of Boss Mackenzie. Still, the Northern Pacific failed to put in one significant clause. They didn't put language in our Constitution surrendering North Dakota's rights under the equal footing doctrine to ownership of the Missouri River and the 1883 rail bridge that spans it. At no time in the subsequent 133 years has the state forfeited its ownership of the river or the bridge. Even now, the state is in federal court affirming its ownership of the Missouri River under the equal footing doctrine. The BNSF project description is in error when it says BNSF currently owns and operates a single track structure across the Missouri River in Bismarck, North Dakota. North Dakota owns that bridge. BNSF inherited only a right to use the bridge from its original builder, the Northern Pacific Railway. The project description is only part of the plan, as BNSF has made clear in public statements. They have two intentions: to build a new bridge able to carry two tracks and to destroy the old bridge. As has been pointed out, if they had approached the project without the latter intention, the bridge would already be under construction. The capacity and intent for a second track brings in factors that must be considered before approval of their plans. The two tracks only work in this location if the private company adds a second track through downtown Bismarck. North Dakota cities grew around railroads in the 19th century. Passengers and freight were unloaded in depots in the hearts of Bismarck and Mandan. We have no depots. We've recognized in the railroads in the 21st century should go around cities. Plans were drawn for BNSF to build a new bridge either north with 9 miles of track or south of Bismarck with 18 miles of track. Those costs at $6 million per mile would be the private railroad's responsibility. Building through the center of our city means costs are shifted from the railroads to the taxpayers for crossings to deal with traffic problems and safety concerns. There may be 5 new underpasses required at costs well over $100 million. Expansion to 2 rails threatens downtown, investments in local business, and $3 million invested by the city in quiet rail. Underpasses would need to be rebuilt with all the traffic disruption and expense of shoe-fly parallel tracks, costs borne by taxpayers for the profits of a private corporation. These factors need to be considered with the application. The public trust doctrine requires you to manage our sovereign lands in the best interests of present and future generations. It is not in the best interests of those generations to remove their bridge and shift railroad costs to the taxpayers. State law says state and its political subdivisions shall cooperate with the director of the State Historical Society in safeguarding state historic sites and in the preservation of historical and archaeological sites. He has. The 1883 rail bridge has been identified by the State Historical Board as a significant historical site. As such, the bridge may not be destroyed, removed, otherwise disposed of in any manner without the approval of the State Historical Board. BNSF has not sought that approval. The destruction of the old bridge would compromise the interests of generations of our citizens by denying them healthy recreational use of their property and a cultural, historical tie to the state's past. The Attorney General has asserted in federal court that the state owns the riverbed of the Missouri. No state official has taken an official position that the people of North Dakota do not own the Missouri riverbed or the structures arising from it. And here today, citizens are asserting our state's ownership of the bridge. And it's in front of you for your decision, which in itself is recognition that the state does have responsibility. We are not opposed to BNSF building a new bridge, but we are opposed to decisions about destruction of our old bridge being made by a private corporation and a federal agency without regard to the public trust doctrine, our state's rights, and our historic preservation laws. I request that you deny the current application as written and encourage BNSF to submit a proposal that can be supported by the people of North Dakota. I have written comments. There's 3 copies of paper.
I appreciate this opportunity to address the potential environmental effects of BNSF's construction of a new rail bridge between Bismarck and Mandan on state land. My name is J. Signey Startland. During my federal career, I led teams preparing environmental impact statements for the U.S. Department of the Interior. I previously worked for the State Historical Society of North Dakota as a chief archaeologist. I now serve as a 4 board member. I was born and raised in Bismarck and now live in Morton County. I thought it would be easy to write a speech summarizing the environmental impacts of BNSF's application to build a new rail bridge on state land 20 feet upstream from the existing historic rail bridge. All the environmental information should be in the draft and final environmental impact statements, the EISs, prepared by BNSF's contractor Jacobs Engineering Group. But instead, I found a complete disconnect between BNSF's sovereign land permit application and the environmental documents submitted to the U.S. Coast Guard for BNSF's navigation permit. In their EISs, BNSF did not evaluate the potential environmental effects of retaining the historic rail bridge in place and constructing a new rail bridge 20 feet upstream. Instead, their proposed action was to build a new bridge and demolish the old. Although the environmental effects of other alternatives preserving the existing bridge are evaluated in the EISs, those bridges would be constructed further upstream of the existing bridge at 42.5 feet or 92.5 feet upstream. However, the land-based environmental effects of the construction of a new rail bridge at the currently proposed location are partially disclosed in the draft EIS. This is important because the ordinary high water mark prior to North Dakota statehood was more extensive than disclosed in the EISs and is under state ownership and jurisdiction. Impacts include removal of 19 acres of trees, which BNSF refuses to replant. In addition, 29.1 acres of herbaceous land cover will be lost, as well as 1.1 acres of shoreline habitat to be destroyed without mitigation. Although the city of Bismarck expressed concern that encroachment of the hillside upslope of the project could affect Bismarck West End Reservoir, BNSF said they intend to stay within their right-of-way and, quote, remediation of the existing slope instability between the BNSF tract and the West End Reservoir is outside the scope of this NEPA review, end quote. This is a groundwater issue, however, over which the state of North Dakota has jurisdiction. The draft EIS briefly discusses impacts to recreational trails on either side of the river, saying, quote, the earthwork required to align the track with the new bridge will result in permanent changes to the trails throughout the project area, end quote. While the final EIS says, quote, the riverfront trail will be restored to a condition that is equal or better to pre-construction, end quote. There is no commitment to restore the walking trail on public land on the west side of the river. In addition, even though David Meyer, Operations Director at Bismarck Parks and Recreation District, requested input on recreation trail restoration, the final EIS leaves restoration up to the construction contractor without input from the riparian landowner. Because BNSF's proposed action for this sovereign land permit differs drastically from the alternatives analyzed in the draft and final EISs, the potential environmental effects of BNSF's construction of a new rail bridge on state land are unknown and must be evaluated before the state of North Dakota issues a permit. I recommend that the Department of Water Resources deny BNSF's sovereign land permit application and instead recommend BNSF build a bridge 92.5 feet upstream. This will preserve the historic bridge that belongs to the people of North Dakota while meeting the need for a new rail bridge. Thank you.
Share my screen. Okay, just going to share my screen here.
Not showing up?
Nope. Try it one more time.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I'm just trying to share my screen.
I think Andrea went to look for technical staff to see if they could assist.
Teams there. Stop sharing. So open screen one or the PowerPoint desktop.
Yeah, just don't click it.
The flash drive, I gave that to you.
Can you rejoin the meeting?
It's right there. Well, I think I should just stay because right there.
Can we rejoin it?
Sure. I should just be able to click there. And then, do I want to go to my desktop and then click on that? Click on that.
It's already presented, but it doesn't show their stop.
Okay. So it should hit the desktop, or I did my presentation before, actually, right within this folder.
Yeah, we need to probably get a different device.
Do you want to just use my flash drive?
Yeah, if that's that would not hurt.
We're going to pause and someone else can speak.
Are we on? Yep. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address this group. My name is Amy Guthrie Sackerson. My education and training led me to a varied professional life. I have been an archaeologist, paleontologist, and fossil preparator, a researcher, and an archivist. I have an appreciation for history. I've learned the value of knowing the history that gives context to our lives. The past has shaped the towns, houses, and landscapes in which we live, as it has shaped the people who share those spaces and places. We are our past, and we are also the foundation for our future. People matter, places matter, history matters, and vision matters. The Bismarck-Mandan Rail Bridge belongs to our future, as it has belonged to our past. To lose it is both unthinkable and unnecessary. It is a defining element of this nation and this community. I have been an advisor to the National Trust for Historic Preservation for some 15 years. I greatly respect the National Trust's advocacy and commitment to preserving the places that matter to our national narrative, and I'm honored to be their connection to the places that matter to the people of North Dakota. For over 70 years, the National Trust has driven the powerful movement to save America's historic places, protecting hundreds of threatened or neglected places each year, and supporting those who seek preservation solutions to complicated issues. Decades of advocacy have found that compromise and vision are often the key to success in developing viable and vital preservation outcomes. Combined with vision and financial creativity, the National Trust offers more than moral support. They offer legal advice, sound organizational models, and a dynamic staff with exceptional outreach capabilities. Across this country, through the National Trust's Main Street America program, nearly $90 billion have been invested in the rehabilitation of more than 300,000 historic buildings. Through their grant program, in the past fiscal year alone, the National Trust awarded more than 300 grants totaling almost $9 million in direct support of America's historic places. In 2019, the Trust listed the Bismarck-Mandan Rail Bridge to their 11 most endangered American places list. Not an honor, really, but it is a sign of the national significance of this 1883 structure and the meaning it holds in the unique story of westward expansion across this continent. The list has included, over the years, such iconic American places as Antietam Battlefield, Walden Pond, Little Rock Central High School, Custer Battlefield National Monument, the Corps of Discoveries Travelers Rest, Pompey's Pillar, the Manhattan Project Enola Gay Hangar, Angel Island Immigration Station, and Theodore Roosevelt's Elkhorn Ranch. Of the 300 plus sites that have been featured on this list, fewer than 5% have been lost. I find that amazing and incredibly encouraging. Places matter to us, help shape us, and bind us to our communities, our history, and give us vision for the future we will share. The National Trust considers the preservation of the rail bridge an opportunity for Burlington Northern Santa Fe to acknowledge the complex history of the railroad to this region and to both the indigenous tribes whose world it tore apart and the homesteaders it carried to the Great Plains. 140 years have given this unique structure time to become visually embedded in the communities on both sides, becoming an integral part of the sense of place for the people who live here. North Dakota and its people do not need to lose this resource. There is a viable preservation option. It is time for BNSF to be a good neighbor and a good corporate partner. It is time for compromise is all that is needed for progress and preservation to be a team that carries a successful repurposing to a reality. The Trust believes in working partnerships. There is no profoundly compelling reason for this bridge to be lost. Burlington Northern Santa Fe has built its empire with the help of this structure and with the investment of our national government. Time to give back in kind. So I ask you to do what is in your power to do. Deny BNSF's request for a sovereign lands permit until ownership of the bridge has been legally determined, a plan for a preservation-compatible rail bridge has been presented and approved, and the 1883 bridge's future secured. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say real quick that we're about an hour into this. We started about 15 minutes late due to technical issues, but we're about halfway through the 2 hours. So just a little heads up so you can plan your time accordingly. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Emily Sackerson. I don't fall far from that tree. That's my mother, who's the representative for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. I work for the Northern Plains National Heritage Area. My background is in historic preservation. I am actually here to share a statement that was sent over to Northern Plains National Heritage Area from one of our partners. So on behalf of Professor Dominic Fisher, the chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture in the School of Design, Architecture and Arts, and associate professor of landscape architecture at North Dakota State University, Fargo, I'd like to submit his comment. And Dominic Fisher was the author with his students of the 2019 feasibility study for the repurposing of this bridge into a pedestrian pathway. So he says that the ability of the public to freely enjoy their liberty and maintain their sovereign land and waterways for future success is paramount to preserving the North Dakota way of life. The conversion of the historic bridge to a public asset, in addition to a new rail bridge, is not only feasible, it has been cited by multiple experts as integral to the connection of parks and open spaces in North Dakota. There are hundreds of completed rails to trails developments in over 41 states. We are not asking to hinder the development of a new BNSF bridge. We are asking that the 1883 Bridge of North Dakota be considered an important property of its residents and be preserved for future generations. Or as former North Dakota Governor Art Link said, let those who follow and repopulate the land be able to say, our grandparents did their job well. A cultural trail with its histories linking centuries of commerce should not be demolished. for one when it can be to the benefit of all. Thank you.
Greetings. I'm Margie Zoll-Geenerson, a marketing and communications professional who has lived and worked in this community for 35 years and who also has a passion for historic preservation. I've been a Friends of the Rail Bridge board member since 2018, and I'm here today to present the vision and economic possibilities of a rail-to-trail conversion for our historic bridge. We are visionaries. We look at opportunities when people say things can't be done. In fact, the building of this historic bridge across the mighty Missouri was considered an engineering marvel of its time. George Shattuck Morrison took on the challenge, and the bridge has benefited the growth of North Dakota for over 140 years. Next slide. Preserving and repurposing the rail bridge is an opportunity to utilize and elevate an existing asset. It's a natural tourist attraction that is already built. Preserving the rail bridge will produce numerous benefits beyond recreation and tourism, including fostering civic pride, increasing historic awareness, and stimulating economic development along the river. Like the North Dakota Department of Commerce and Tourism Division, we should embrace tourism marketing and couple it with workforce development to retain and attract people who want to live in a vibrant community, a community that cares about its iconic past and provides the outdoor recreation that a rail-to-trail conversion would create. Visitors to the North Dakota tourism site are encouraged to move to Bismarck-Mandan with these words. Straddling the beautiful Missouri River, Bismarck-Mandan combines two unique cities into one extraordinary community. The metro area is home to the North Dakota State Capitol, public and private post-secondary education, two distinct downtown, and miles upon miles of park and recreational trails. Here are some facts you can't ignore when determining the future of the repurposed bridge. North Dakota Travel and Tourism generated $2.6 billion in direct visitor spending and $237 million in visitor paid taxes to the state's economy in 2021. Tourism is a significant revenue source. In 2021, there were more than 21.7 million visitors to and through North Dakota. There are more than 2,900 businesses and organizations offering countless attractions, events, and tourism-related activities in the state. The Missouri River waterfront is already an attraction, and our use of a rail-to-trail conversion will only increase the new heritage landing and gateway to science attractions overlooking the river. As the state and private donors are investing in the Theodore Roosevelt Library in Medora, it's interesting to note in September 1883, Theodore Roosevelt crossed this very bridge on his way to the Badlands. The thought of tearing down the historic bridge seems ironic and counterproductive to North Dakota's tourism and this state-funded project. A repurposed bridge is economically, culturally, and environmentally feasible according to the Bismarck-Mandan Missouri River Historic Bridge Repurposing Study. The two bridges can coexist. In fact, as you've heard, BNSF provided a preservation alternative in the permitting process. The Department of Water Resources should review this important document, the feasibility study. Included in it are governance and jurisdiction considerations, security and maintenance issues, trail connections, and probable costs to complete and maintain the repurposed bridge. The Minneapolis Stone Arch Bridge is a shining example of the cultural impact a converted rail bridge can have on a community. Built in 1883, this former railroad bridge was purchased by the Minnesota Department of Transportation in the 1990s and is currently maintained by the Minneapolis Park District. Throughout the year, the bridge is a hub of community activity. The state engineer and the North Dakota Department of Water Resources must examine all interests and consequences, including the cumulative effect of the proposed activity and other proposed projects. This is especially true when the review involves a historic landmark of this importance. A sovereign's land permit should only be granted upon the condition that the new bridge is designed to coexist with the historic bridge. Thank you for your time.
I'm Dawn Kopp. I'm the CEO of the Downtown Business Association of Bismarck, or more readily known as the Downtowners Association. I provided copies of my testimony, which is fairly lengthy, so I will just give a few notes and try to draw out some of the most important things from my testimony. I've been the CEO of the Downtowners Association for nearly 16 years. And there is no doubt that there is a very strong historic and sense of place connecting downtown Bismarck to the river. Some of the things that I want to just draw out are things that have already been testified and echo some of the concerns that Ms. Fisher and Mr. Potter have already stated. Looking through the EIS when it was drafted and then approved, as Ms. Fisher has already alluded to or mentioned, it's not complete. There just is not enough information in there. There are no mitigating strategies on what happens to the communities on either side of this project. And so being in this role as the CEO of the Downtowners Association is a great concern. What will happen to downtown Bismarck should a second track be established parallel to the current track? This is something that Mr. Potter has already stated in his remarks. And I just want to mention that this has happened. We've had experience with this in the past. When the overpass at Washington Street and Main Avenue was reconstructed in the 1990s, we lost a lot of private property because rail traffic could not be disrupted. And so a shoe fly had to be created in order to reconstruct that intersection, but not disrupt the rail traffic. The shoe fly went from west of Washington all the way to west of 3rd Street and took out that whole swath of private properties that were attained in some manner so that this shoe fly could be constructed. As Mr. Potter had stated, there would be great traffic disruption with a second track being installed and constructed in downtown Bismarck. And he also had stated that it will most likely become the taxpayers' duty to try to figure out how to mitigate this traffic disruption. He had stated that there are 5 crossings that would probably need new underpasses created. But there are also 4 overpass bridges or overhead bridges that would need to be widened as well and improved. So there's actually at least 9 crossings that would need more or would need improvements. Talking with engineers, a new overpass or a new underpass, on the low side is $10 to $12 million. So you can calculate that pretty easily on what the cost would be initially without the loss of property, because at every intersection that needs to be improved with an overpass or an overhead bridge, again, rail traffic cannot be disrupted. So a shoe fly would have to be installed at every location, meaning the decimation of downtown Bismarck and the private property that is currently there. A shoe fly takes up at least a block or two, most likely 2 blocks, to one direction or the other. So how would these properties be attained? Would it be just a purchase from BNSF or by BNSF? Would it be something else? That would be to be seen. So my remarks are that the EIS was not complete. There's no mitigation listed or mentioned within the EIS that shows what happens with a high capacity bridge being constructed over the Missouri River. So beyond the absolute importance of the connection between downtown Bismarck and the Missouri River and the saving of this wonderful historic structure, there needs to be more information and more studies done to make sure that downtown Bismarck and all of the cities that were built up along the rail across North Dakota has to be looked at and see what happens with the impact a second high capacity rail would have across the state in these communities. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Mona. I'm an environmental attorney with BNSF Railway. Laura Mona, environmental attorney with BNSF Rail. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, sorry. BNSF support and service to the Bismarck Mandan communities and to North Dakota has grown over our shared history and is expected to continue to grow. More than 1.6 million carloads travel through the state on BNSF. Last year alone, BNSF transported over 140,000 carloads of industrial products and over 170,000 carloads of agricultural products from the state to markets around the nation and world. And we brought in over 100,000 carloads of commodities for the state's businesses and consumers. However, without replacement of the existing bridge, our service as well as our safety are at risk. As explained in our Sovereign Lands Permit application, the purpose and need for this project is clear. The existing structure has a history of exposure to ice jams and is susceptible to scour. The trusses, while important from an architectural and historical perspective, also contain fracture-critical members. What this means is there are steel components in tension, and if one failed, it is likely that a portion or all of the bridge would collapse. That is not to say that the bridge cannot be used today and in the near term, but understand that for years, BNSF has been taking substantial efforts to inspect and maintain the existing bridge. And because of its design at the time it was constructed and its condition, we have had to place speed, size, and weight restrictions on the bridge. This impacts not only what we can ship, but for who we can ship. So while you may see rail cars going across the bridge today, what you are not seeing are the many rail cars we have had to reroute or simply could not ship because of restrictions. This is limiting new and existing industries from doing business in North Dakota. The new structure will be a single track bridge. Although the piers will be wide enough to accommodate a second track in the future, nothing else for a second track will be constructed at this time. If and when rail demand increases to the point that extra capacity is needed, only then would plans for a second track be proposed, which would require additional permits and approvals, including notice to the public. With construction of the new bridge to avoid a net rise in the river, which is a federal requirement, the existing bridge and piers must be removed. Without removal of the old structures, there will be an increase in the base flood elevation, as well as an increase in the potential to impact other structures within the floodplain. Therefore, removal of the bridge is a necessary part of our project. We want to note that BNSF has not taken removal of the bridge lightly. BNSF has spent countless hours and expended substantial funds in reviews, designs, and consultations with state and federal agencies, as well as interested parties like FORB, to evaluate alternatives through the Section 106 consultation process and under NEPA. There were no feasible or reasonable alternatives to removal, as other concepts would either require construction outside of BNSF property, impact Bismarck's water reservoir, require replacement of another rail bridge, or require extensive falls work that would result in greater impacts to the river. To expand on the 106 process, over the past 5 years, the Coast Guard held a public meeting and 21 additional meetings involving over 25 consulting parties, 2 tribes, and multiple agencies, including the North Dakota State Historic Preservation Office. The 106 process culminated in a memorandum of agreement, or MOA, that sets out mitigation to address adverse impacts from removal of the bridge. Under that MOA, BNSF is funding a $500,000 grant program for projects associated with loss of the bridge. In addition, a salvage working group has been established to facilitate donations of parts of the bridge to the cities of Mandan and Bismarck and to the Mandan Railroad Museum. Lastly, I would like to briefly address recent concerns regarding BNSF's ownership of the bridge and why, if BNSF owns the bridge and right-of-way, did we submit this application. BNSF has clear title to the bridge through an 1864 Act of Congress, which granted BNSF's predecessor a right-of-way through public lands. Federal law is clear that all property located within the right-of-way and used in building and operating the railroad became part of the real estate of the railroad. So despite our ownership of the bridge and right-of-way, BNSF often takes a voluntary approach to reasonable state and local requirements in connection with railroad construction projects, as we've done here. BNSF's voluntary cooperation here is a demonstration of our commitment to work with the department and this community. So in closing, we ask the department to approve our application as soon as possible so we may begin construction on this critical project. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. My name is Mike Herzog. I am the Director of Bridge Construction for the BNSF Railway. I'm a licensed civil engineer in the state of Kansas. My background has nearly 30 years of experience in developing heavy civil bridge projects between the BNSF Railway and the Kansas DOT. And to start with, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk about our project here this morning. BNSF's project replacing our bridge over the Missouri River is part of BNSF's Heavy Bridge Program. And the Heavy Bridge Program addresses taking on our larger structures that crosses major waterways and making sure that we replace them before the end of their useful life. This bridge we're talking about, as you've heard, it's nearing the end of its useful life. And when we talk about the useful life of a bridge, in my opinion, they go through really 3 different phases, cycles, and that is timeframes where you're making repairs, which we've done over the decades on this bridge. And while continuing to make repairs, you get to a point where you have to make restrictions on the traffic that travels over it, which we have in the form of weight and speed restrictions. And then ultimately, you reach a point in time where you have to replace it, which is where we're at today. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about in my brief time here, I'm going to talk to you about how we got to this point and then what it looks like going forward. So how we got here. Project design started back in 2015. We've been through the consulting party meetings, 21 of them since January of 2018, with the 21st meeting concluding last year in March. We've reached the point where we have our federal permits in hand. We've selected a contractor. The BNSF funding is in place, and we're ready to start construction. Now, what did we consider to get to this point? When we were developing the project and permit applications, we went through an alternative analysis. And for the replacement bridge, BNSF had 3 goals really in mind that the replacement bridge needed to meet. It needed to have piers that can accept a second track at some undetermined point in the future. It needed to have minimal impacts on the environment and the public. And when I talk about impacts, I talk about no rise in base flood elevation. I talk about no encroachments on the neighboring properties, whether you're talking about the Bismarck reservoirs in the northeast quadrant, the Missouri River nature area in the northwest quadrant, or the private residents on the west side of the river. And then lastly, the third need was to optimize the cost, schedule, and efficiency of building the replacement bridge. We looked at multiple concepts that varied the span lengths over the river and varied the offsets from the existing bridge. The short version of this alternative analysis, the longer the spans, the greater the offsets, the much greater the impacts on the environment and the public were, in addition to the overall cost of the project increasing by orders of magnitude. And when we talk about the longer spans that you heard of this morning, nearly doubling the price of the project and dramatically increasing the impacts on the reservoirs and the natural area I mentioned earlier. And in short, we found no reasonable or feasible concept that allowed the existing bridge to remain. Now, where are we going with this? What are we building? The concept approved by the U.S. Coast Guard and the Army Corps of Engineers, we're using 200-foot spans over the river, which are similar to the span lengths used for the I-94 or Memorial Bridge that are just upstream and downstream from this location. Center line of the new bridge will be 20 foot upstream to the north. We stay within our right-of-way. And the river piers will have the ability to accept a second track at some point in the future. And to expand on that topic just a bit, this is not an uncommon effort when you're looking at building a major new bridge. It's fairly common when you're talking about a railroad bridge or the DOT. And I would point to a bridge here in North Dakota in Valley City, where in 1908, the new bridge built there was built to accommodate 2 tracks. And here it is roughly 115 years later, and we still have 1 track across that bridge. So what influenced the preferred concept for what we're going to build? As I mentioned earlier, we had neighboring property that drove the real need to stay within BNSF right-of-way. You have the bluff and water reservoirs in the northeast, the Missouri Wildlife Refuge area in the northwest, and multiple private residents in the southwest quadrant. And in closing, I'd like to say we've done our due diligence. We've looked at the impacts associated with this project, and we will be minimizing them as outlined in our Coast Guard permits. There really is no feasible concept that does not allow the existing bridge to remain without creating a rise in the base flood elevation. And we're ready to do the right thing by constructing a reliable and safe modern bridge. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for working for us, serving our state and our people. Thank you for convening this meeting also today. I know you're determined to do the best for us all. I'm not a FORB member. I am standing. If I could, I would applaud everything I've heard this morning from all directions. I'm more a placeholder for a whole bunch of other people who are working right now, or for other reasons too far, they can't be here. I'm just another guy in the community. I was born in Fargo, moved to Bismarck as a 3-year-old. Folks found a place to live in Mandan. That's where I grew up. Went to school at UND, worked at the state capitol under Byron Dorgan in the tax department for a couple of years, and then go west, young man. North Dakotans have long been proud of this bridge, spanning that great waterway. Here in the north, it united the West, the growing West, with markets and transportation to the rest of the United States. As far as history, Edmonton wouldn't have grown to Bismarck's presently bustling prosperity had it been sited elsewhere. And Mandan wouldn't have birthed a large division yard and decades of good employment that continue, and trade. The Bismarck-Mandan area is rightfully proud of its many outdoor recreation opportunities, its city and county parks, and others like Fort Lincoln and the Cross Ranch. What if we had an opportunity and could afford to build a marvelous structure that would do what this bridge can do for us? North Dakotans and tourist visitors, recreation, connection, and inspiring vistas. This gives a commanding grand view and crossing of the mighty Missouri. Many now ply the river in floating patios, pontoon boats, and other boats, but not everyone can afford this. This bridge has continued to join 2 growing cities long after, as kids, we'd pile into the family car with Mom in Mandan to shop or have appointments in Bismarck, and needed to remember it wasn't in our mountain time zone. It was an hour later. This is a great opportunity. Like our country's conversion and development of hundreds of miles of abandoned railroad right-of-way to trail use, this is a chance we must not destroy. It can attract tourists, which is North Dakota's 3rd highest revenue source, and new North Dakotans, more of whom we sorely need to fill begging open job positions. Keeping our bridge could cost money. Too expensive. We're swimming in cash, so much so that the current governor, despite Mandan's own expert doyen of North Dakota state tax law and policy, the recently retired Mandan Senator Dwight Cook, his repeated insistence to wisely keep the 3 legs of our tax stool, our governor has proposed doing away with one of those, the income tax. We've got all the money we need, apparently. Corporate proposals like citing this. It's understandable that businesses will usually float project proposals that most benefit them. Our laws require corporations to put profit maximization first above all else. The highest and best use once meant only realizing more money through development. Over time, it's wisely grown to include a lot more considerations. So sometimes those first proposals, as floated, to see if the citizenry's government will roll over and accept it with little further effort, should be examined very deeply. Who built this bridge? Not the Burlington Railroad, not the Santa Fe Railroad, the Northern Pacific. In our Western system, whoever buys and holds title to property owns it, quote, owns it. When they're done with something, they can discard it, toss it in the dustbin. The bridge, the wealthy and politically powerful railroad monopoly here can't be allowed to dictate take it or leave it terms. The bridge can easily be developed as a bicycling and walking feature. Currently, cyclists are left to belatedly retrofitted pathways that risk dodging among busy motorists to transit between Mandan and Bismarck, particularly across the Memorial Bridge, the newly built Memorial Bridge. Who benefited from this railroad bridge? Foremost, the railroad. We're familiar with the story of the railroad's posters, exhorting new immigrants and even helping to fund their start in furtherance of our country's providential manifest destiny policies, enticing newcomers, sturdy pioneers, experienced hardy peasant farmers, as well as those who'd never sown seed, with promises of the rain following the plow and the never-ending bounties of endless bumper crops, which would have to be hauled somewhere by the railroad. But the same railroad soon charged high freight rates, which, along with high Eastern Bank rates and low grain companies' prices, gave rise to justifiably incensed DFL party. Engineers and planners may still have enough imagination and abilities to easily accomplish a clever solution to siting a new bridge. The bridge has great economic and other life left. I lived in the Twin Cities for well over a decade before moving back to North Dakota. Long ago, their visionary forefathers set aside land in the heart of development, in the heart of the city, that became well-used jewels for their future residents to enjoy. The chain of lakes and the old Stone Arch Railroad Bridge, which I've cycled over many times and gained healthy, rejuvenating exercise on, is just among one of those. In the heart of their growing metro area, it's central and heavily used, including for non-fossil fuel commuting. Before that, I lived in Seattle for a time. They built a beautiful and highly used concrete park over a busy interstate freeway for their people to enjoy. This is something we can do not only for ourselves, but leave as a legacy to benefit our children, theirs, and future North Dakotans, and the rest of the United States. Also, many are familiar with New York City's rejuvenation of an abandoned railroad bed through the middle of the city into an inspiring park and path in the heart of Gotham. It's false thrift to junk as worthless scrap this outstanding structure and opportunity. Please don't be short-sighted, intent on destroying this treasure. Let's look to a real investor, one who has regularly, carefully considered all the aspects of each of his holdings. The Wizard of Omaha, Warren Buffett himself, a prime driver of Berkshire Hathaway, owner of BNSF. He's long and clearly proclaimed his firm belief that to benefit Americans, the wealthiest among us should pay their fair share of taxes, which benefit us all. Bridges unite areas and people. Excuse me. Lately, I think our country could use a little more uniting. Thank you very much.
Can you state your name for the record? Sir, your name. You didn't say your name for the record.
I'm sorry. My name is Bruce Bale, B-A-L-E. There's a Bale Township out in Sargent County, I believe. I had nothing to do with that. My great-grandfather did.
Good morning. I'm Amy Macbeth with BNSF Railway. I just wanted to reiterate a few of the points that we've heard a little bit and expand on some. This project we're seeking a permit for does not include adding a second main line or double track in downtown Bismarck or over the Missouri River. As BNSF has stated and the United States Coast Guard reiterated in its final environmental impact statement, adding a second track would require additional permits and review. What has been permitted for the U.S. Coast Guard, from the U.S. Coast Guard and the Army Corps of Engineers are piers for the river bridge capable of holding a second bridge deck and a second track if needed in the future. We determine when to add capacity based on a number of factors, including customers' needs in a particular region, efficiency of our network, and financial considerations. While we don't know yet when that would be, we do know this new railroad bridge will last another 130 years. A similar example is a railroad bridge in Valley City, my hometown, which Mike talked about a little bit earlier. Likewise, and importantly, building the substructure for this bridge between Bismarck and Mandan with the capacity to hold a second track limits the work that would ever have to occur again in the Missouri River. That means the impact to the environment, to the wildlife is reduced because we don't have to go back into the river a second time to build piers. BNSF has been transparent about the width of the piers, as the rendering over there produced for the public meeting in 2017 shows. The piers have additional width should added capacity be needed in the future. We've heard inaccurate statements that this means BNSF will surely add a second main track through downtown Bismarck, even after the Coast Guard has said it is not in this project plan or permit. To be clear, BNSF has no plans to construct a second main track through Bismarck. If that should be a project in the future we seek to build, it would require another permit review and public notice. Additionally, much discussion was dedicated during the consulting party meetings, which many of the folks in this room attended, to researching and reviewing other railroad bridges to find a similar example to BNSF's bridge over the Missouri River here. In short, there is no apples to apples comparison. We could find no cases where privately owned railroad bridges in active rail corridors have become public recreational bridges. BNSF's predecessor donated the Fairview Bridge in Cartwright, North Dakota for public use, but it was on an abandoned rail line. Similarly, the Stone Arch Bridge in Minneapolis that we've heard about today was on an abandoned rail line. This line here is not abandoned. Other examples cited by proponents making our bridge a pedestrian bridge are not similar situations in terms of ownership or the active rail corridor. Here in Bismarck, Mandan, this is very much an active corridor. The tracks connect one of our largest, most important facilities in the state in Mandan, where hundreds of our employees work. We have active rail operations 24 hours a day, and we expect that to continue. We request the department to approve our permit for construction of our new bridge. Thank you.
I just want to say we've got
about 15 minutes left, so if there's anyone else that wishes to speak, please do so.
Lyle with them again. I'm going to respond to a couple of things that the railroad said. So they indeed did start in 2015. And how did they start? They tried to do an environmental assessment, a shortcut procedure, rather than an EIS. Did they ever at any point in this proceeding address the issue of ownership? Did they submit any documents or anything? They did not. Is there going to be another opportunity to consider the full impacts as the state law requires in this proceeding for these other effects that have been mentioned here? There is no requirement when they're taking two tracks across for most of those things. And the shortcut, the EAA, is at best what you will get. I doubt that will happen. So this is the opportunity to address these legal issues. Finally, the issue of ownership of a riverbed at the time of statehood with a standing bridge is an issue of first impression. Of course, there aren't any legal precedents because there's never been a situation like this. So look at the law and the facts in that context. Thank you.
John Risch again. BNSF mentioned that they were rerouting traffic because of weight restrictions and whatnot. Clearly, there's one thing that they did do. They reduced the speed from 35 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour. And I, as an engineer, probably went over that bridge hundreds and hundreds of times. But currently, they are still, there are coal trains that are going across that bridge. A coal train weighs 20,000 tons. I don't know of any other trains on BNSF's system that weighs more than a coal train that's going over this current bridge. Put that in perspective, A loaded semi-trailer tractor truck is limited to 40 tons on America's interstate. So that's 500 semi-tractor trailer trucks in one coal train, and that's going back and forth almost daily over that bridge now. So the point I'm trying to make is the bridge is good enough shape right now to take a 20,000 ton coal train. It's been in existence for 143 years. I can't imagine it not being strong enough for a walking track path for the next 100 years for Bismarck and Mandan residents and tourists.
Is there anybody online that wishes to speak? It does not appear so. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to speak or add to what they said previously? We got a few minutes left. Okay, it is now 10:59 a.m. and this meeting will now be closed. For those desiring to provide additional comments, please submit your written comments to the department staff for consideration with all other verbal written comments received. The record will be open for all written comments that are received by close of business today, January 20, 2023. This meeting is now concluded, and I would like to offer a sincere thank you for showing up today and providing us comment on this very important project. Thank you.
Thank you. We thank you.